Ladies and gentlemen, once again, welcome to this very exciting segment today on the 26th day of May 2022, and very soon we'll be joining with our live broadcast from the Queensland Parliament House, and later on we will also be having all the latest news and the Daily India report, which will all come after the Parliament sitting for today. As you can hear the bells ringing, so as soon as the Parliament begins, we will join in and resume the proceedings from there. And it's always wonderful to have your company. And this morning, 17 degrees and mostly sunny, and wonderful to see the sun out. And this morning, the PRD research for this period has been released, and it is a wonderful report. We will get ST in here one day to go through that report, which has been very well presented, and there were lots of people who came and took part in the presentation of those reports for this year, which happened. Well, right now, let's cross over to Queensland Parliament House.
Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Honourable members, I respectfully acknowledge that we are sitting today on the land of Aboriginal people and pay my respects to elders past and present. I thank them as First Australians for their careful custodianship of the land over countless generations. We are indeed fortunate in this country of ours to have two of the world's oldest continuing living cultures in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, whose lands, winds and waters we all now share. Honourable members, this morning I was proud to host Reconciliation Queensland's breakfast launch of 2022's National Reconciliation Week. This morning's event we were joined by video link with various regional communities from across Queensland. I also wish to acknowledge that today is National Sorry Day. We should never forget the mistreatment of First Nations peoples who were forcibly removed from their families and communities, which are now known as the Stolen Generations. At its heart, reconciliation is about unity. Reconciliation of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the wider community is a mark of our progress as a nation. Of course, we still have much work to do. It is a cause that I wholeheartedly support, both as the Speaker with our Reconciliation Action Plan here at Parliament, but more importantly as a father of 3 Aboriginal children. The Parliamentary Service has been a leader among Australian jurisdictions in promoting reconciliation over many years. We were the first jurisdiction to have an Indigenous Liaison Officer, now known as the First Peoples Liaison Officer, in 2008. It's a very important role, and Marjorie is carrying it off with distinction. The Parliamentary Service, of course, did adopt a Reconciliation Action Plan in 2020. On behalf of the Parliamentary Service today, I restate our commitment to that Reconciliation Action Plan and to reconciliation. I commend these efforts and the Service's commitment to reconciliation to the House. Are there any matters of privilege? I call the Premier.
Mr Speaker, I move that this House desires to place on record its appreciation of the services rendered to this state by the late David Wheatcroft Corey AM, a former Member of Parliament of Queensland, and that Mr Speaker be requested to convey to the family of the deceased gentleman the above resolution, together with an expression of the sympathy and sorrow of the members of the Parliament of Queensland in the loss that they have sustained. Mr Speaker, David Corey AM was born in Warwick on the 3rd of August 1928 and was educated at Warwick Central State School and Brisbane Grammar School. After school, Mr Corey worked as a farmer and grazier on the property Vermont near Warwick. His lifelong dedication to the Warwick community is clear to see. He became patron or was awarded life membership of the Warwick Show Society, the Turf Club and the Tennis Association. From 1961 to 1965, he was chairman of the Warwick branch of the Graziers Association. Then came political service as a member of the Country Party. He won a by-election for the seat of Warwick on the 19th of October 1963. Doesn't that show the depth of history of this place, Mr Speaker? Here we are in 2022, with a condolence motion for someone who was first elected almost 60 years ago. When Frank Nicklin was the Premier of Queensland, Robert Menzies was the Prime Minister of Australia and John F Kennedy was in the White House. Mr Corey was the member for Warwick for 14 years until he retired at the 1977 election. As well as his dedicated representation of the people of Warwick, he was on various committees from 1969 to 1977, including subjects of particular interest to him, such as primary industries and lands, an important role in important matters. In passing, I also note that one of the committees that he served on was the Parliamentary Refreshment Room Committee. I confess I'm not totally clear on the purpose of the Refreshment Room Committee. Perhaps the clerk could enlighten us. It's not called the CLA. But I'm sure that Mr Corey attended to his duties with diligence. He was also a delegate at the Australian Constitutional Convention in 1972 and 1973, and at the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association in 1970 and 1971 in Canberra, and he was part of the parliamentary delegation to Japan and Southeast Asia in 1973 and a trade delegation to the Middle East in 1975. When he retired in 1977, he said he could not achieve any more in this place. We take that as a positive. Not that he had nothing left to offer, but that he had left nothing undone. Mr Speaker, compliments can be rare in this place, unfortunately, so let me quote the words of Labor leader Tom Burns on Mr Corey's retirement. I found David a decent fellow to fight a campaign against, and I never felt that I should change my opinion of him. So there you go. The record shows that courtesy does exist, and that Mr Corey was well regarded even by his political opponents. From 1986 to 2002, he was chair of the Rural Lands Protection Board. In 2001, he was awarded the Centenary Medal in recognition of his service to the environment. In 2004, he was made a member of the Order of Australia. These were very fitting tributes, and his family should be enormously proud of his life. I acknowledge and welcome in the gallery Mr Corey's son Ben and daughter-in-law Margot. Mr Speaker, David Wheatcroft Corey AM passed away on the 14th of February, aged 93 years. A service to celebrate his life was held at St Mark's Anglican Church in Warwick. I place on record the government's thanks for the years of service Mr Corey gave to the institutions of our democracy and to the Queensland community. And on behalf of the government, I extend my sympathy and that of this House to his family and to his friends.
Mr Speaker.
I call the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr Speaker, today this House is paying tribute to David Wheatcroft Corey, the member for Warwick from 1963 until 1977. It's interesting to note that when David Corey was elected, and as the Premier said nearly 60 years ago, Frank Nicklin was Premier and Leader of the Country Party, Alan Munro was Minister for Industrial Development and Leader of the Liberal Party, and Jack Duggan was the Leader of the Opposition and Leader of the Labor Party. There were still 3 members serving in the Parliament who'd been members of both the ALP and, after the 57 split, members of the Queensland Labor Party. Few facts could so clearly demonstrate the very different environment in which Mr Corey was elected. He was the son of Warwick. He was born in Warwick in 1928. His significant education was undertaken in Warwick. He farmed in the Warwick area and he raised his family in Warwick. He served the Warwick community before his election to this place through a myriad of local organisations: the Graziers Association, the Warwick Turf Club, the Warwick Tennis Association, and as an alderman on the Warwick and a councillor of the Warwick Show and Rodeo Association. Only months after the 63 state election, the Country Party member for Warwick, the Minister for Agriculture and Forestry, Otto Madsen, died, and David Corey was elected in the subsequent by-election. It's interesting to note that the campaign director in that by-election was in fact Tom Burns, later member for Lytton and Deputy Premier in the Goss government. David Corey brought to this House a passionate belief and an unrestrained zeal for the needs of his constituents. While he continued to champion the interests of primary producers in Warwick, he was equally conscious of the contribution of secondary industries, principally those involved in the processing of the agricultural products of his electorate, such as grains and dairy. At the core of his concerns was the need to establish reliable water supplies for domestic use and irrigators. He very much favoured the construction of Stage 1 of Leslie Dam, and once that was near completion, he campaigned unceasingly for the commencement of Stage 2 to increase its storage capacity. That the capacity of the dam was increased owes so much to his tenacity and strength of advocacy. Along with the need for water supplies, David Corey was equally determined to see improvements in soil quality. He was aware of the growing demand for quality grains and saw the introduction of soil-enriching legumes as a means of achieving this objective. He was a supporter of decentralisation, and he fought hard to maintain young people in the regions. His speech in the address and reply in August 64 summed up his concerns for Warwick, and I'll quote, "We must do everything possible to increase the job opportunities in the area by developing our industries so that when the young people leave school we do not lose them to other areas. We must increase the production of our land as well as the volume of our industries." End quote. He served in this House for 14 years. In 1977, at the relatively young age of 49, he chose to retire, feeling his prospects of contributing further were limited. He then decided to pursue other options and made a magnificent contribution outside of this place. On the last day of Parliament, before being dissolved that year, Deputy Premier and Treasurer Bill Knox, referring to his service on the Justice Committee, noted, and I quote, "I appreciated very much his down-to-earth contributions on that committee, and we have all appreciated his company in this House and elsewhere. He has always been a major contributor to both the debates and the dignity of this House." End quote. In his retirement, he expressed a view on the proceedings of this House which still apply. The Warwick Daily News reports him as saying, and I quote, "In practical terms, insults achieve nothing. They don't build dams or fix railways." Mr Corey served his House, his party and his community with distinction, and there are many who would no doubt regret he failed to achieve higher office. After his retirement, he served 20 years on the Rural Lands Protection Board. He was vocal in his campaign for greater support for research into ways to reduce dingoes, mice and plant pests throughout regional areas. It was in this capacity, in 2004, he was recognised with a Member of Order of Australia. He remained a stalwart of the National Party and then the Liberal National Party in Warwick after he left the Parliament. His retirement did not diminish his passion for his cause. His successor, Des Booth, summarised these views when he said, "Wherever David went, he always exhibited the hallmarks of a gentleman." The opposition places on record our appreciation for David Corey's contributions. We extend our sincerest condolences to his wife Margot, who cannot be with us today, their son Ben and his wife Margot, who are both in the gallery, and to his entire family. Vale David.
Mr Speaker.
I call the member for Southern Downs.
Thank you, sir. The 14th of February this year saw the sad passing of former MP for Warwick, David Wheatcroft Corey AM. He was at the age of 93 years, as we've heard. On behalf of the people of Southern Downs, I extend to David's wife Margot, his son Ben and his wife Margot, and family our sympathies and our thoughts at this time of loss. I'm very proud indeed to say a few words about this great yet deeply humble man. I'll leave the task of memorialising David as the farmer, the friend and the family man to those who are perhaps better placed to do his story full justice. But as a successor MP for the district which David once represented, I'd like to publicly venerate him for his time in Parliament and as one of our community's great parliamentary representatives, on par with giants such as former Premier TJ Byrne, Otto Madsen and Lawrence Springborg. And in doing so, I hope that I will add some further lustre to his already shining reputation. David was born in Warwick in 1928, and his lifetime spanned a remarkable period in Queensland's political history. I'm sure that I speak for everyone who knew David during his long life when I state that he was a gentleman to all. And we've already heard the Premier and the Opposition Leader remark upon how David was respected and liked across the political divide, and that is definitely true. But he was also a straight shooter and a man who never surrendered his values to expediency. As a respected farmer and grazier, David was well in touch with his community and he exhibited a genuine and practical dedication to the public good. It was a dedication which served him well and served our district well when he was Warwick's Member of Parliament. David was elected to the State Parliament as the Member for Warwick on the 18th of October 1963 at the by-election caused by the sudden death of the well-beloved Otto Madsen, who had been the Country Party Member for Warwick since 1947 and a popular and effective Primary Industries Minister in the government under Sir Frank Nicklin. Now, the going was not easy for David at his first election. In our neck of the woods, those who are chosen by local party members to succeed a well-respected departing MP usually suffer a significant adverse swing at the polls, and this was certainly the case for me when I took over from Lawrence Springborg. And so it was for David too. He achieved a slender 51% majority against Labor at the 1964 election, representing a 10% primary vote swing against the Country Party's previous result under Madsen 6 months earlier at the 1963 general election. But as a new MP, David exerted himself faithfully and enthusiastically, and it was not long before his qualities as a representative and an advocate for his seat were recognised with solid two-party preferred results of 66, 61, 62, 75 and 75% in his favour at the 66, 69, 72 and 74 state elections respectively. Much of the basis for this success must be attributed to his wife Margot, who for much of David's time in Parliament functioned as his electorate secretary, for it was not until 1973 that members of Parliament were afforded staff and an electorate office. Margot's affinity for detail and business-like approach made her an invaluable asset, and their partnership assured that the electors of Warwick would receive prompt and careful attention to their queries and concerns. Politics is never simple, and MPs of consequence understand that while compromise is necessary, there are also times when you have to stick to your guns, even if doing so runs counter to one's own personal and political interests or to those of powerful people. One of the things which I really admired about David was his polite but firm refusal to compromise on matters of significant principle to him. It was known in political circles at the time that David did not get on well with Sir Joh Bjelke-Petersen, who had narrowly become Premier after the retirement of Sir Frank Nicklin in 1968 and the subsequent sudden death of his successor, Jack Pizzey, after only 6 months in office. There's no doubt in my mind that David would have made a very effective minister. But in politics, ability is not always the decisive consideration in matters of promotion. That's to put it politely, I think. I'm sure many of us hold that dear to heart. I think I'm on firm ground in saying that David, had he been willing to toe the line and to be silent on matters of importance to him were at hand, he would have made the ministry and would have done a fine job in any portfolio. So the question is, how did he differ from Sir Joh? I asked David this question once, and he revealed in his answer, which was tastefully understated, much about himself, because in essence David was a coalitionist. He valued and respected the then Liberal Party's role in governing with the Country Party in coalition. David knew instinctively that governing Queensland was a job for a broad church of city and country representatives with a reasonable spectrum of political values. This sensible pragmatism, it seems, put him at odds with Sir Joh's famously ruthless and unaccommodating approach to coalition. Hindsight strongly suggests that it was David who was right, because in 1983, this is long after his departure from Parliament of course, the government's coalition agreement ended with irreconcilable differences between the two party leaders. David and I believe that that event, to a significant extent, laid the ground for the loss of government by the Nationals in the 1989 state election, where a resurgent Labor Party under Wayne Goss took government. I think it says much about a politician when, while still in the fullness and prime of his political career, he decides to hang up his armour and ride home to the farm. And that is what David Corey did. After serving his community in Parliament for more than 14 years, he decided not to contest the 1977 state election, at which he was succeeded by the popular National Party member Des Booth. And of course the Country Party had become the National Party on the 6th of April 1974, which happens to be my birthday. So I just popped that in. David went on to continue his leadership in and love for his community. He was active in the Warwick Show and Rodeo Society, Warwick Polo Cross, and also spent many years as a member and later chairman of the Rural Lands Protection Board. David was fittingly recognised with the award of the Centenary Medal in 2001 and later in 2004 as a member of the Order of Australia for his work in rural lands protection and the control and elimination of invasive pests. Over the years since I became our MP, I would every couple of months pop in to see David and Margot at their Murray's Bridge property. I was always assured of a friendly cup of tea and a slice of cake, but more importantly, of receiving the wisdom and advice of a forerunner who had already seen and done everything that I was facing as a country MP. I would marvel at how David could relate events in the first person, mind you, Mr Speaker, in Queensland's political history where he himself was a participant. He was actually there. He could relate to me firsthand the famous personalities and quarrels of days past and share the nuggets of truth which remain as lessons today. David's stories and advice admitted me to the puzzling but enduring certainty that everything changes, but everything stays the same. I've made my share of mistakes and boo-boos, but I never went wrong when I sought and followed David's advice. So as long as God spares me, I will always remember David Corey. How could I ever forget the quiet man with iron in his soul? Vale, David Wheatcroft Corey AM.
I call the member for Warrego.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. David Wheatcroft Corey AM was born in Warwick in 1928. He was a farmer and grazier from the property Vermont at Warwick and Swanfells Valley. He married Margot in 1967, and his son Ben is here with us in the gallery today. David Corey was elected at a by-election at the electorate of Warwick following the sudden death in office of the former member Otto Madsen, who had only just been re-elected at a state election. My eldest sister Dulcie is named after Otto Madsen's daughter, Dulcie Madsen, who passed away during childbirth. My father knew David well, and they were of a similar age, and both lived in the Southern Downs. Both shared passion for all matters that concerned pests, weeds, and more often than not, wild dogs and dingo fences. David served as the member for Warwick for 14 years. In his final speech, he made a statement. "I have made many friends, and I do not think I have made many enemies over that period." That statement really captures the kind manner in which David Corey conducted himself throughout life. I came to know David when he was reappointed as chairman of the Rural Lands Protection Board during the Borbidge government. He served on the Rural Lands Protection Board for some 20 years. As chair of the board, we often saw him in the minister's office and out and about in the field. He did a great amount of work on the realignment and rebuilding and maintenance of the dingo barrier fence, one of the longest structures in the world. He oversaw many of the negotiations to ensure the fence continued to protect the sheep country from wild dogs without causing too many issues with the cattle producers. Given his primary producer experience, he always had a practical and common sense approach. He put in place a management structure for the dingo barrier fence staff, strategically locating them throughout Queensland to ensure the integrity of the fence at all times. David was a very hands-on chairman and took a personal interest in ensuring that the dingo fence was effective. One day he went out to inspect a very expensive grid across the Alpha Road near Tambo. The grid was referred to as the Golden Grid by the previous Rural Lands Protection Board chairman. On David's visit, he confronted the local Tambo Shire Council foreman about the Golden Grid and its costing. The foreman advised David he should take the matter up with the former mayor of the Tambo Shire Council. David soon learnt that that former mayor happened to be the minister who had appointed him as chair of the Rural Lands Protection Board. I don't think much more was said about the Golden Grid, except to say that it's an excellent piece of infrastructure that is still effective today. And I recall visiting the Golden Grid with other members of this House when one of the parliamentary committees was out at Tambo looking at the wild dog exclusion fencing. David understood the needs of travelling stock. He was instrumental in ensuring that travelling stock had the appropriate watering points along the long paddock. He also encouraged councils to do the same. In 2004, he was awarded the Member of the Order of Australia for service to the environment, particularly in the areas of rural lands protection in Queensland and throughout animal and weed pest management. He was patron of the Warwick Polo Cross Club, which hosted several World Polo Cross Championships. David attended them all. He didn't miss a Polo Cross Carnival. Even when his eyesight was failing, he could hear the games and loved attending the Polo Cross. At the games, his many friends and family would keep him informed of the score and what the penalties were for. His elixir in life was Bundaberg rum, and in his case it proved to be correct. David left a legacy in his achievements in the electorate of Warwick and his love of rural and regional Queensland throughout his work in the Rural Lands Protection Board. His family are here today and can be proud of his achievements for this state, and I want to acknowledge his contribution and extend my deepest condolences to his family.
Honourable members, will you please indicate your agreement with the motion by standing in silence for 1 minute? Thank you, honourable members. Honourable members, on the 31st of January 2022, the Education, Employment and Training Committee tabled report number 15, Inquiry into the Operation of Trading Allowable Hours Act 1990. Notice of motion, House to take note of committee reports number 2, relates to that report. Yesterday, the Minister for Education, Minister for Industrial Relations and Minister for Racing introduced the Trading Allowable Hours and Other Legislation Amendment Bill. That bill implements a recommendation of the inquiry and report by the committee. A bill is a superior form of proceeding to a motion, and thus any issue of anticipation favours a bill. It is clear that any debate of report number 15 of the committee is likely to be anticipatory of the bill in terms of Standing Order 231. Accordingly, I rule that the debate of the committee report will need to be either postponed until after the bill has been dealt with or discharged from the notice paper. Honourable members, I wish to advise that we will be visited in the gallery this morning by students and teachers from Narangba Valley State School in the electorate of Kawangba and Coolum Beach Christian College in the electorate of Nindri. Are there any appointments to be announced? Will the clerk read the list of petitions lodged?
The following honourable member has lodged an e-petition which is now closed and presented. Mr Last, from 5,661 petitioners, requesting the House to address the level of crime in far north Queensland by undertaking a number of measures to reform the youth justice system and child safety.
Notifications and tablings. I call the clerk.
I inform the House of the tabling of a certain paper in accordance with the notification of papers document emailed to members.
Are there any ministerial papers? Are there any ministerial notices of motion? Are there any ministerial statements? I call the Honourable the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, cost of living pressures are hitting the people of this state hard. There's the cost of fuel that impacts on the cost of food and the cost of groceries. For people on low and fixed incomes, it is especially hard forcing them to make difficult choices. In many cases, it means going without. But, Mr Speaker, today I have good news for Queensland. We are going to provide Queenslanders with a $175 cost of living rebate. The $175 rebate will be provided on electricity bills and is only possible because the electricity assets of Queensland are owned by the people of Queensland. The combined value of this rebate is $385 million. Mr Speaker, this is not the first dividend Queenslanders have earned from their power assets. Over the past 4 years, Queenslanders have been paid $575 because they kept their electricity networks in their own hands. This brings the total amount paid in electricity dividends to $1.185 billion. Mr Speaker, this dividend is not available in states that sold off their electricity assets. Mr Speaker, this dividend offsets strong economic headwinds impacting electricity prices. The war in Ukraine has led to higher gas prices linked to global oil prices. The Callide C4 generator has also been offline for repairs following an explosion. We are also disadvantaged by the former federal government's lack of a national energy policy. But it is only because Queenslanders own these assets that this $175 cost of living rebate is available. Mr Speaker, $175 might not sound like much to some people, but for those facing these hard choices, it is a help. It is further proof that the people of this state made the right choices, the strongest choice that continues to pay dividends.
Order. Order, members. One member has the call. It's the Premier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Ours is a freedom-loving society. Lives have been sacrificed in wars defending that ideal. We believe in free speech, but accept that with that freedom comes responsibility. No one is free to vilify or spread hate. And, Mr Speaker, my government is moving to make that law. I am proud to announce that the public display of Nazi hate symbols will be banned in Queensland. It will be a criminal offence to display those symbols to promote hatred and cause fear. Religions such as Hinduism, Buddhism and Jainism will be exempt, as will displays for educational purposes. We do not do this lightly or without good reason. Late last year, police seized a Nazi flag flown near a Brisbane synagogue. Only a few months earlier, a train carriage in the suburbs was graffitied with swastikas and Nazi slogans. The member for Capalaba had a swastika painted on his electorate office. The Queensland Jewish Board of Deputies said it showed a rise of anti-Semitism that cannot be ignored. Mr Speaker, our government agrees. Let me make this absolutely plain. Nazism is evil. Evil triumphs.
Member for Kawana.
Mr Speaker, evil triumphs. Evil triumphs when good people do nothing.
That's right.
We will not do nothing and allow this evil to grow. Mr Speaker, I thought those who promoted these hideous ideas were to be pitied. Instead, I say they deserve to be punished. Their crimes are not harmless, nor are their ideologies. They are to be called out, confronted and condemned. I want to thank the Parliamentary Legal Affairs and Safety Committee that has examined this issue, and I table the government's response to its report. The committee has made 17 recommendations. The government accepts all 17. We will consult further with the legal community and others and introduce a bill in the second half of this year. To those who promote these symbols of hate, I say this. Your community condemns you and your days of spreading ignorance and hate are over. Mr Speaker, every Queenslander has the right to die with dignity. This week marks National Palliative Care Week, a time when we acknowledge the right of all Australians to access high-quality care and where they need it. Mr Speaker, improving access to quality palliative care is a priority for our government. That's why we've committed to reforming Queensland's palliative care system and invested $171 million over 5 years to improve services. Today I can announce that as part of our palliative care reform package, we'll invest $55 million to boost palliative care in regional, rural and remote Queensland. Once again, Mr Speaker, a government for all Queensland. Services will commence from early October, benefiting Queenslanders across 9 hospital and health services, including Cairns and Hinterland, the North West, Townsville, Mackay, the Central West, Central Queensland, Wide Bay, Darling Downs and the South West Hospital and Health Service. Mr Speaker, after a rigorous independent process, I can confirm that Blue Care has won the tender to provide these services. This funding will deliver a holistic palliative care for thousands of Queenslanders in regional and remote areas. It will cover home care, bereavement and support services, telehealth and on-call and 24/7 nursing care. Mr Speaker, this isn't just about healthcare, it's about quality of life. This initiative will ensure that more Queenslanders spend the rest of their lives in comfort, close to families and friends. Mr Speaker, today is National Sorry Day, a time to reflect on the hurt and sufferings of stolen generations and unite to work towards a better future. In the 1800s to the 1970s, it's estimated that between 1 in 3 and 1 in 10 children were separated from their families, including thousands of children here in Queensland. Mr Speaker, the 26th of May is the anniversary of the tabling of the Bringing Them Home report, a report which documented the horrendous suffering of our First Nations people at the hands of government and institutions around Australia. And that's why on this day in particular we acknowledge the wrongs of the past, remember the profound grief, suffering and loss caused by the forcible removal of those children. Mr Speaker, tomorrow also marks the beginning of National Reconciliation Week, which runs from the 27th of May till the 3rd of June. The 2022 theme, Be Brave, Make Change, urges us to tackle the unfinished business of reconciliation. I'm pleased to confirm that our government is doing just that. We've introduced Queensland's Reconciliation Action Plan to deliver social, economic and cultural outcomes for Indigenous people. We've established the Queensland First Children and Families Board. We're the first government to appoint a First Nations housing advisor. We're working with the First Nations people to co-design a whole-of-government and community strategy as part of our response to the first report from the Women's Safety and Justice Task Force. We're establishing the Office of the Chief First Nations Justice Officer. We're establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Chief Health Officer. We enable legal recognition of traditional Torres Strait Islander child-rearing practices. Thank the member for Cook. We're implementing a partnership approach to deliver the National Agreement on Closing the Gap. We introduced the Local Thriving Communities Reform to enable Indigenous communities to make decisions on the future of their people. And we're progressing the path to treaty, one of the highest priorities of our government, which is backed by a $300 million fund to promote reconciliation and healing. Mr Speaker, this House issued a formal apology to stolen generations in 1999. A national apology was made in 2008, but the work of reconciliation is never done. National Sorry Day serves as a reminder to us all that we must continue to acknowledge and reflect on the wrongs of the past. Mr Speaker, I'm pleased to confirm that tomorrow, along with Minister Enoch, I'll unveil a new memorial in Anzac Square to honour Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander men and women who served our country. And I'm looking forward to the Queensland Reconciliation Awards next week. Mr Speaker, we'll continue to work with First Nations people around the state to acknowledge the wrongs of the past, bridge the gap and support Indigenous Queenslanders to have a greater say in the future of their state. Mr Speaker, Andrew Symonds was an outstanding player who made an unforgettable contribution to Queensland and Australian cricket. He was an all-round...
So, ladies and gentlemen, there you are, news update, and we might join the Parliament sitting later on as well. But the key announcement today was that hate crimes have no place in Queensland. And this morning, as you've just heard, the Premier announced that Queensland will ban the public display of symbols designed to incite hate and cause fear. And as the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, the Minister Leon Leonard strongly supported this dissent. Hate symbols have no place in our society, but unfortunately we have seen them emerging from the past few years. Late last year, the police seized a Nazi flag flown over the Brisbane Synagogue. Only a few months earlier, a train carriage in the suburbs was graffitied with the Nazi symbol and slogans. So we are not who we are Queenslanders. So this is not what we are. And the key point there is that I quite like the way it's been mentioned as Nazi flag or the Nazi symbol and not Nazi swastika, because swastika is not Nazi. It is Hindu symbol, and it's a symbol of peace. So these crimes are not harmless. They need to be called out and condemned, which is today's announcement is about. So the announcement has been made today, but the bill will be introduced into the Parliament later in the year. So the bill has not been tabled in the Parliament, but it has been announced. So it has been announced that Queensland will be banning this, the Nazi symbol. But the use of Hindu swastika is allowed. So however, this is from the Premier, I'm quoting. However, we know that some symbols have profound meaning in some religions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. The new laws will allow this symbol to be used respectfully and in circumstances, but prevent them from being used as symbol of hate. So that is a good outcome if it's used within those boundaries and those parameters. So, ladies and gentlemen, right now, let's go to our daily India report.
Welcome to the Daily India Report that brings you reports, interviews, features and much more on India and the Indian diaspora. Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi gives India's art and culture to his counterparts from Quad nations at the summit in Tokyo on May 24th.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in Japan on a two-day visit to attend a summit of the Quad leaders, which is aimed at further bolstering cooperation among the member nations of the influential grouping and discussing developments in the Indo-Pacific region. From Sanchi art and box with hand-carved Rogan painting to Pattamadai silk mats and Gond art painting, Modi gave a glimpse of India's rich heritage and culture as he presented gifts to his counterparts and dignitaries from the 4 Quad nations. Sanchi, the art of hand-cutting designs on paper, is an art from Mathura in Uttar Pradesh, the legendary home of Lord Krishna. Traditionally, motifs from Lord Krishna's stories are created in stencils. These stencils are cut free using a scissor or a plate. The delicate Sanchi is often held together by thin sheets of paper. The Sanchi panel is based on the theme of Thakurani Ghat from Mathura by a national awardee. Rogan painting is an art of cloth printing practiced in the Kutch district of Gujarat. In this craft, paint made from boiled oil and vegetable dyes is laid down on fabric using either a metal block, printing or a stylus painting.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi to visit Chennai in Tamil Nadu state on May 26 to lay foundation stones for 11 projects worth Rs 31,400 crores.
Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi will lay the foundation stones of 11 projects worth more than Rs 31,400 crores at JLN Indoor Stadium in Chennai on May 26th. The project will help significantly improve socio-economic prosperity in the region, have a transformative impact on several sectors, and also help create employment opportunities, the Indian Prime Minister's office said in a statement. These projects are seen as a step towards boosting infrastructure development, enhancing connectivity and giving an impetus to ease of living in the region. The Indian Prime Minister will dedicate to the nation 5 projects worth over Rs 2,900 crores, the statement said. They include the 75 kilometers Madurai-Theni railway gauge conversion project built at a project cost of over Rs 500 crores, which will facilitate access and give a boost to tourism in the region, it said. The other projects include the 30-kilometer third railway line between Tambaram and Chengalpattu, the 115-kilometer Ennore-Chengalpattu section and 271 kilometers Thiruvarur-Bengaluru section of ETB PNMT's natural gas pipeline built at a project cost of around Rs 850 crores and Rs 910 crores respectively.
Indian Minister Piyush Goyal on May 24th asked global business leaders at the World Economic Forum annual meeting to come to India and grow with India.
Pitching India as one of the best investment destinations globally, Indian Minister Piyush Goyal invited global business leaders at the World Economic Forum annual meeting to come to India and grow with India. Goyal, who has been meeting a host of global leaders, reiterated India's position as one of the world's most preferred investment destinations and told them about the massive scope and range of the opportunities India presents to investors globally. The Commerce and Industry Minister, who addressed a breakfast session on 24th May morning, said there was so much interest in India among those present that he was finding it hard to adjust his calendar but was trying to accommodate everyone as all of them are important and are keen to make large investments. On 23rd May evening, he also met John Kerry and discussed future tracks for India-US Climate and Clean Energy Agenda 2030 partnership. He also addressed a global investors roundtable. His other meetings included those with Standard Chartered Bank Group CEO Bill Winters, Micron Technology CEO Sanjay Mehrotra, and Brookfield Asset Management CEO Bruce Flatt.
Char Dham Yatra was disrupted amid snowfall and rain. Devotees halted as precautionary measures.
Snowfall and rain hit the Char Dham Yatra on May 24th, with thousands of pilgrims halted en route to Kedarnath and Yamunotri temples in the Garhwal Himalayas as a precautionary measure. Kedarnath began receiving snow early on May 24th, while the lower areas were hit by rains, prompting authorities to stop the pilgrims for their safety in Gaurikund and Sonprayag. Pilgrims going to Yamunotri were also halted in Chanakichatty, the last stopover on the way to the famous shrine, as the weather turned worse there in the afternoon. The peaks around Badrinath also received snow. Butt Court Subdivisional Magistrate Shalini Neki said Yamunotri-bound pilgrims were stopped in Chanakechatti as a precautionary measure. They will be allowed to proceed on their onward journey after weather clears. Pilgrims halted on the way to the shrine on May 23rd due to bad weather and were permitted to go to temple on May 24th morning. She said, adding that they have already returned after offering prayers there. Rudraprayag District Magistrate Mayur Dikshit also said the pilgrims on the way to Kedarnath were halted in Sonprayag and Gaurikund as the weather is bad and it is not safe for pilgrims to go beyond these points for the time being.
Himachal Pradesh climber scales 4 8,000-meter peaks in less than 1 month.
Baljeet Kaur has become the first Indian mountaineer to scale 4 8,000-meter peaks in less than a month after she successfully climbed Mount Lahotse, the 4th highest mountain in the world. Kaur, a 27-year-old climber from Himachal Pradesh, scaled Mount Lahotse on May 22nd and became the first Indian climber to have climbed 4 8,000-meter peaks in a single season, said Pasang Sherpa, the director at Peak Promotion Private Limited. She successfully scaled the world's 4th highest peak with her guide, Mingma Sherpa, he said, adding that it was Kaur's 4th successful climb this spring season. Baljeet and Mingma summited Mount Annapurna on April 28th and Mount Kanchenjunga on May 12th.
Hollywood singer Justin Bieber to perform in New Delhi on October 18, 2022.
Pop star Justin Bieber is all set to bring his Justice World Tour to New Delhi on October 18, 2022. Promoters Book My Show and AEG Presents Asia announced on May 24th. The Canadian singer, known for tracks like Baby, Sorry, Coast and Lonely, will travel with his tour to over 30 countries, playing more than 125 shows from May 2022 through March 2023. The tour started in Mexico this month and will have a stop in Italy in July before continuing on to Scandinavia for shows in August, followed by South America, South Africa, Middle East and India in October. The concert, scheduled to be held at Jawaharlal Nehru Stadium in New Delhi. Tickets for the show are set to go on sale from June 4th on Book My Show, with a pre-sale window opening on June 2nd. Tickets are priced from Rs 4,000 onwards. The tour will close out the year in Asia, Australia and New Zealand before moving to UK and Europe in early 2023. Additional dates have also been announced for Dubai, Bahrain, Sydney, Manila, Amsterdam, London and Dublin. These new shows come right after Bieber's 2022 North American tour, which kicked off in San Diego on February 18th. The New Delhi gig would mark the 28-year-old Grammy winner's second visit to India post his 2017 Purpose World Tour.
Bollywood actor Alia Bhatt's maiden production, Darlings, to release on Netflix.
Ma'am, Darlings is coming on Netflix, right?
And ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you in Daily India Report, and that's quite an extensive report there. As we know that today we are broadcasting the live session of the Parliament sitting, and it is wonderful to see that a bill which has been announced today but not presented yet. It will be presented, and it has to do with the religious vilification and use of some of the symbols that can be used as hate symbols. So there has always been a lot of talks about the difference between a Nazi symbol and the Hindu symbol of swastika. So there are two different things, so the clarifications on that there. Right now, this very, very terrible news out of Texas.
Sit down and don't play this stuff.
Shooting is right now, and you are doing nothing.
No, he needs to get his ass out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over.
This is totally predictable when you...
Sir, you're out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Please leave this auditorium. I can't believe you're a sick son of a would come to a deal like this to make a political issue. It's on assholes like you. Why don't you get out of here?
about that this was evil. The only thing evil is what he continues to do to the people of this state. He says this was unpredictable. It was totally predictable, and I predict this will continue to happen when you continue to have a governor who will not stand up for the people of Texas. His only interest is the gun lobby. He's scheduled to speak at the NRA convention this Friday in Houston, Texas, just days after these kids were slaughtered right here in Uvalde. After they were slaughtered at Santa Fe High School, at Sutherland Springs, in Midland, Odessa, in El Paso, Texas. 5 of the worst mass shootings in U.S. history right here in this state in the last 5 years. He was governor for every single one of them. And after every one of these, he had a press conference just like this. And I wish to hell, when he came to El Paso, someone would have stood up and held him to account and confronted him and shocked the conscience of this state into doing something, because if we do nothing, we will continue to see this year after year, school after school, kid after kid. This one is on all of us.
And he has quite a good and valid point there. So, people say that the people there have a mental health problem, but I think guns are a problem. So if there were no guns out there in the public, this would not happen. And I agree with that gentleman there who stood up against the governor there to say that no, this is just not on, and it is predictable, and this is what's happening out there. Well, also today is the National Sorry Day, so let's take a look at what our Indigenous people are saying, also how they vow to keep fighting for their rights on the land.
Traditional owners tried to block the Barossa offshore gas field project being developed by Santos and its South Korean partner SK E&S, with court action in South Korea.
Yeah, no one has consulted us about development.
They lodged an injunction attempting to stop South Korean banks lending millions of dollars to SK E&S for the $4.7 billion project, arguing the new gas field and 300-kilometre pipeline to Santos's LNG plant in Darwin could damage sacred sea sites, increase climate change, and that spills, dredging and shipping could harm marine animals.
Well, you got crocodiles and turtles and major fish as like the barramundi.
Santos says the project won't increase greenhouse gas emissions because it would trap them under the sea using carbon capture and storage.
If it was so easy to do carbon capture and storage, Santos would have already done it for the Bayu-Undan field at 6% CO2. Here we have the Barossa, which is closer to 20% CO2.
Traditional owners are disappointed the court dismissed their application, but they're not giving up.
We'll keep fighting on because we think it's the right thing, and it'll be disastrous if the development goes ahead.
Santos says it did carry out stakeholder consultation. It wouldn't comment on the South Korean court's decision.
The South Korean courts ultimately decided that this is a problem for the Australian government to decide upon.
Traditional owners are hoping the new federal government will consider how climate change concerns figured in its election win.
Hopefully that the government will realise that this development shouldn't take place either.
It's a tough argument to bring to a government elected promising both a strong economy and tougher climate action. Jane Barton, ABC News.
And of course, being the National Reconciliation Week as well, there are many functions being organised, and of course we know that Queensland Multicultural Council will be holding its event on the 30th at the Queensland Parliament House. So, there are stark warnings from the Western Australia Liberal women after the latest election results.
Days after a disastrous federal election showing in WA, Liberals past and present are still trying to wrap their heads around a devastating result.
Our whole party at the moment is not resonating with women, is not resonating with the community.
After losing his seat of Hasluck, former Cabinet Minister Ken Wyatt said the party needed to stop being so bloke-centric. Former State Liberal MP Alyssa Hayden witnessed the bias within the party and warns there will be dire consequences if it doesn't stop.
Yes, we can improve on that. absolutely, we can improve on that. And if we think we can't, then we're going to be stuck in opposition for a very long time.
At state level, the Liberals hold just 2 seats, and the
Right now, we'll join once again to the Queensland Parliament House, where Minister Leanne Enoch is making the announcement.
Is available through these centres. Increasingly, our neighbourhood and community centres have had to support Queenslanders in crisis moments, many of whom are presenting at centres for the very first time. Earlier this year, the Palaszczuk government provided a one-off funding boost of $20,000 to each of those 127 state-funded neighbourhood and community centres across Queensland to support centres to respond to the increased demand on centres since the onset of COVID-19. In addition to this $2.54 million funding boost, we have also delivered on our $1.7 million commitment to place neighbourhood and Care Army Connect workers in 15 centres across Queensland. This year has presented many challenges to so many Queenslanders already impacted by more than 2 years of global pandemic and rising cost of living pressures. The Queensland Government will continue to work with local communities and our service partners to ensure the necessary supports are in place. And Mr Speaker, can I join with my colleagues and others across the chamber in acknowledging that today is National Sorry Day, a day to reflect on past policies that saw the horrific removal of First Nations children, to acknowledge the sometimes ugly and uncomfortable truth of our shared history, and to lean on the strength of our collective humanity as we commit to action beyond sorry. It's a day of reflection and a day to reaffirm our commitment to voice, treaty and truth, something that we've seen a renewed commitment from our federal government, and a commitment that this government, the Palaszczuk government, continues to honour.
I call the Minister for Health and Ambulance Services.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and can I also acknowledge that it's National Sorry Day today and reflect on the great words that we just heard from the Minister. Can I advise the House that the stress our
Seem to be having a bit of a transmission issue there with a number of people. And of course, the key thing today coming out is the new legislation which has, being announced. But, the key point to note there is that it has not passed, or it has not been tabled in Parliament yet, but it has been, announced. And of course, the full extent of that we will only get to know after it's been tabled and debated and passed. So the key points there is that the Queensland is going to ban the use of Nazi hate symbol, but allow the use of the Hindu symbol swastika. So many times people mention that the Nazi swastika, there is no such thing as Nazi swastika, because Nazi symbol or Hindu swastika. So there's a clear distinction there, and the distinction has been made in the report. If you read the report, if you can search for Minister Leanne Linnard and her the statement is quite clear. Obviously, previously, some of the comments that were made included the word Nazi swastika, but once it has been cleared that it is not what it is, that there is no such thing as Nazi swastika, so now it's the words have been rectified. So it is properly stated now. So what it states, it's that hate symbols have no place in our society, but unfortunately we have seen them emerging. Last year, police seized a Nazi flag flown near Brisbane Synagogue. Only months later, a train carriage in the suburbs was graffitied with Nazi symbols. So this word, Nazi symbols here, in one of the earlier reports, was reported as swastika. And so, there's a mistake. So, good on the community to making the government aware that these are two different things and they need to be treated in those two different manners as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's about all we have for you today. The National Sorry Day, the things go will be happening, and we'll bring to you reports on all the functions and events that do take place in that space. Well, right now it's time to say goodbye until tomorrow.